Medill's latest research is out, and the headlines are sobering. Since 2005, we've lost more than half of America's newspapers. Print circulation has collapsed nearly 70%. And get this, the top 100 newspaper websites, once seen as our digital salvation, have lost 45% of their traffic in just the past 4 years. In hundreds of U.S. counties, not a single newsroom remains. And where there's no local news, we all know government transparency erodes, misinformation thrives, and trust vanishes. But here's the twist. In the report, amid the decline, new seeds of hope are emerging from nonprofit startups to university-led initiatives. Hi, I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine. On this episode of E&P Reports, we go straight to the source of this year's landmark study. Joining us again is Tim Franklin, the Senior Associate Dean and John M. Mutes Chair in Local News at Northwestern University, Medill School of Journalism, and the leader behind the Local News Initiative. Tim, I just had you on the show a couple weeks ago releasing the regional study. Then you dropped this report, and everybody's buzzing. But the most important story of the day is you are now in the top club of guests for this show. You're joining Ken Doctor, Gordon Burrell, Jeff Jarvis, people who have been on the show over 6-7 times. Do you feel like a regular now? I mean,
yeah. Do you have a rewards program I could be part of? Or yeah,
I'd love to. But so we got to go to the source. We got a new friend, Zach Metzger. Zach, you're described as the project director and lead researcher of the State of Local News Report, PhD candidate, steeped in data. Does that make you the chief nerd? Is that what you would call yourself there?
Technically, our chief nerd is another person on our team who actually has that title and is responsible for the website. So I won't try and step on his toes.
But you've been analyzing trends across thousands of U.S. communities for over 5 years, tracking which regions are losing local coverage and which models are fighting back. So that's what this is all about today. Stick around. After the break, we'll dig into how digital native startups are scaling in underserved areas, why web traffic alone can't sustain reporting, and what role philanthropy and public media must play next. All that and more on the backside of this.
Hello, my name is Walter Hussman. Our family has been in the news business for over 100 years. Journalism includes two parts, reporting the news and providing opinions. But in recent years, there's been too much opinion appearing in news reporting. This has eroded public trust in news reporting to the lowest level of any U.S. institution. To address this, we started a nonprofit, the Center for Integrity in News Reporting.
The Center for Integrity in News Reporting, CFINR, is on a mission to rebuild public trust in journalism, one newsroom and one classroom at a time. We champion the effort to have news organizations and journalism schools create and prominently display their own clear, concise statements of core journalistic values. Learn more by visiting the Center for Integrity and News Reporting site at cfinr.org.
All right, Tim, I got to ask the question, is everyone's hair on fire? I mean, the mood across the industry right now went nutso when the new Medill Report was released just a few days ago. You've got, over 3,500 newspapers has shut down since 2005, nearly 40% of the total, and more than 130 closed just last year alone. Newsroom employment is down more than 75%, and even digital audiences are shrinking at alarming rates. Even Stephen Waldman just penned an op-ed for us the day you released a report about the report, saying there are positive developments, but they're being swamped by the negative trends. We're losing the race against time. Should we all just give up, Tim? What are you trying to say in this report? This is
no. Of course, folks should not give up. I mean, I think what we're living through is a period of retraction. It's also one of creation, and the report talks about some of the creation that's happening. But overall, it's a period of transformation. And so the data goes back 20 years now, and so you can really see the arc of change that's happening. But I think to the point about Steve Waldman's piece is so every year we're losing 130 or so newspapers. We're now on a pace over the last 5 years of picking up about 60 local news startups. And that's great. And I hope that trend accelerates, but there's a gap, there's a delta there between what's being lost and what's being created. And that's the worrying part, I think, of this report.
All right, Tim, I want Zach to wait just a second because I want to bring back a topic. When you were in the show just a couple of weeks ago, one of the most alarming stats is that you released in a regional report, but we were, thinking that could be a bellwether for the national trend, that only 15% of residents pay for any local news. This is in the regional Chicago study, but it transcended, or should I say, went over lots of different demography, city, rural, suburban, what have you. And now the new report shows that the top 100 newspapers dropped site traffic by more than 45% over the past 4 years. Do you see a correlation between those two things? Or what are we seeing here? Is digital no longer our salvation? Should we all just open up our websites? Or am I reading too much into this, Tim?
I think there have been a couple of big developments on the technology front that are affecting that web traffic, but it is in turn affecting consumer behavior and revenue. So back in 2022, Meta, Facebook de-emphasized news. And if you look at the data, there was almost a ski slope drop at many of those news organizations and digital traffic when that happened. And then over the past year, we've seen another decline, not as sharp as the one in 2022, but another decline, which I think is the result of AI and people going to AI platforms and these so-called answer machines to get news and information, and as opposed to going to news websites. And sites are losing that click-through traffic from search to go to their sites. So that's having an effect. I think consumers, especially right now, are being conditioned to wanting news and information quickly, going to an AI platform, ChatGPT, pick Claude, pick your platform, and then just getting an answer quickly. And that's having, I think, a profound effect on traffic.
Zach, it's your turn now. You've been steeped in this data for 5 years. The top line numbers are jarring. 3,500 newspapers shuttered, employment down 75%, digital traffic collapsing, but you also track nuances, network growth, public radio reach, ownership models. I want you to zoom out, Zach. How do you personally interpret this moment, in your opinion, as the guy that's watching the numbers? Is it as dire as it looks, or are we missing the deeper shifts that translate into our future?
So like Tim mentioned, I think that this has really been a period of transformation, and it's been a profound shift. What worries me in some ways, looking out over the landscape and over the history of this landscape over the past 2 decades, is perhaps less about the losses, steep as they may be, and more about the access and this growing divide between the news haves and the news have-nots. We're seeing a lot of great development. We're seeing a lot of great startups emerge. We're seeing some really innovative practices. The model of a network is being embraced, not just by network digital sites, but by a lot of traditional outlets too. There's a lot of innovation happening. A lot of that innovation is also happening in urban areas, in more affluent areas. That's where we're seeing a lot of the really successful startups emerge. That's where we're seeing philanthropy concentrated. We're seeing a lot of more rural areas and less affluent areas be left behind. And those are the places that worry me, because when news disappears in one of those places, it's a lot harder to create a viable alternative.
All right, so let me stay with you, Zach. Let's talk about ownership. Medill's 12 bright spot outlets were almost all independently or locally owned, and yet the percentage of independent newspapers has dropped from 54% to 47% since 2005. Zach, what does this data tell us about why local ownership matters so much, and what are the risks if the share continues to decline?
Yeah, local owners are incredibly important. They're so much more steeped in the community. When you have a large chain paper, the editor might be responsible for 5 or 6 different outlets across a wide geographic area. They're not as immersed in the community as a local owner will be. They're not, talking with community members, connecting with community members as recognizable a face as a local owner will be. And when you have that kind of local ownership, what you wind up with are news outlets that are not only reporting the day-to-day news, but they're kind of the archives of the institutional memory of a place. A lot of them are often the oldest continuously operating businesses in a town. So they're kind of an institution within that place and that community, and are responsible for helping that community see itself, which is tremendously valuable in our current moment. The challenge there is these are the places that we really don't want to be losing. These are the outlets that we really want to be preserving because of that role that they're playing. And if these outlets go away, the ones that remain are just going to be even more concentrated and centralized among large owners. One of the surprising and perhaps concerning things that we saw in this year's report was that of the papers that closed over the past year, the majority of those were these smaller independents, or they're members of smaller chains. We didn't really see the kinds of mass closures or mass consolidation that has characterized a lot of the losses over the past 2 decades, but the trend of loss kind of remained the same. And so that's kind of a concerning development, that we're seeing a lot of these smaller family-run shops close down, because those are the ones that are in some ways the ones we want to lose the least.
Tim, one of the most hopeful threads in the report I saw was about public radio. Medill found that while only 300 of the 1,400 public radio stations currently produce any local content, however, EMP is doing extensive reporting that these local outlets are realizing that their future depends on local content, and more are starting to build those news ecosystems locally. But you also show that their reach is critical into these news deserts, if I might be so bold. How do you think public radio's, I mean, this may be editorializing on your part, but go ahead, we'll let you. What is public radio's role here? Can it help give a voice back to some of these news deserts?
Absolutely, Mike. And so for a while now, I've thought that public radio was one of the potential solutions to the local news crisis that's happening, because these are stations that are recognizable brands in their communities. They're trusted. They have long relationships in those communities, and they have credibility in those areas. So the defunding of public broadcasting that happened a few months back, I think dims that hope of public radio becoming that alternative news source and solving some of the news desert problems. Now, I will say I think it's encouraging that a number of these stations have had successful fundraising drives to make up for the loss of some of that funding that was taken away. But we're at a precarious moment, and I think over the next year or so, we are going to see a number of public radio closures. In the study, we showed there are 9 counties in the U.S. where public radio is the last remaining news source in those counties, and I think unfortunately those are many of the stations that are vulnerable to closing.
All right, let's touch on philanthropy. I'm going to stay with Tim for a minute here. The report finds that 95% of the largest journalism grants went to urban areas. Now, that's staggering. And we've reported on that, especially considering how rural counties that you just said, or we had Zach just say, are most of the news deserts. Tim, again, I may be asking you to editorialize or put on that, looking over all this data over the years, what needs to change? Is this just about geography? Is there also about the infrastructure and how these funders view rural newsrooms? I'm going to let Tim handle that one.
Mike, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked. And this is one of the things that concerns me the most in doing this report. So philanthropic dollars have been flooding into local news over the past couple of years because of the Press Forward campaign. I think that's great. And I hope that it continues. What we found, though, is that many of those dollars are going into metro areas, more than 90% of those dollars. Now, it's possible that some of those dollars go into metro areas and then get funneled back out to other areas. I don't suspect that's a large amount of money. But here's the problem, is that as we see in the study, what we're losing by and large are smaller, independent, for-profit newspapers and news organizations in rural areas and in suburban and exurban areas. So here's the problem, is those owners often have lack of access to capital. They don't have community foundations in their areas. They don't have deep-pocketed investors who can swoop in and help them out. So what are we going to do to try to help preserve many of those owners over the next few years, and what are the consequences if we don't? And so, but one of the things that there's been some discussion about is should there be, which I personally, if you want me to editorialize, think we should think hard about, is some kind of a pooled loan fund so that smaller independent owners who need access to capital, maybe to change their tech stack, or maybe to hire an ad director, or to bring in additional revenue, could tap into low interest loans to get capital to them to help bridge to a future. And so that's something that I think deserves attention. And then also on public policy, we have seen a few states, Illinois included, pass legislation to help out news organizations. And in Illinois, they just started handing out employment tax credits over the summer. And the data shows so far that many of those went to smaller news outlets outside the Chicago area. And those are in many cases folks that need it the most.
All right, Zach, I want to go to you if I may, and this has to do with some. If you really dive into the report, I was struck by the section on digital local news networks. Medill is tracking 849 local news sites across 54 networks. And that sounds promising, but we do a lot of reporting on this, and some of those networks are briefers and aggregators. I mean, again, I'm not trying to, be a snarky, we understand what real news is person, and I get it. And I even put out a newsletter. I put out 2 newsletters a day. One is deep editorial enterprise content, and one is actually curation, where we try to make it easy to package the stories we've collected from other sources. But not a lot of these sites and those networks are doing any original reporting. How do you separate the signal from the noise here? Are these networks truly replacing lost reporting capacity, or just filling up inboxes? Again, this may be a little editorializing, Zach, but I want to hear your opinion.
No, it's a really good question. I think an important question, because when you look at some of these networks on the surface, I mean, it's staggering how big they are. And I think Patch is a perfect example of that, right? Patch last year was claiming to have 2,000 sites. About a quarter of those were actually staffed by reporters doing original local reporting. This year, I think it's over 11,000, might be over 12,000 at this point. So they've ballooned pretty substantially. And the vast majority of those sites are these newsletters. They're aggregated. They're pulling from kind of local events stuff, and they're connected with events calendars or weather, and they're just sort of aggregating all that together. There are a small fraction of those, and we review them to identify that small fraction that are staffed by reporters, and those reporters are churning out content at a regular rate that is unique and original, and in often cases doing a very good job of covering some issues for that community. But they are kind of the minority, and it's the problem, I guess, if you want to say that it's a problem, it's also in some ways the advantage of the network model is that it's very easy to grow by just kind of creating these newsletters. That provides an avenue to very rapid growth. But if you want to actually expand in the content area, you need to be putting reporters in all of those different places. And that's perhaps much more of a challenge. But we're also seeing something that's interesting with the network model, that even beyond network sites, and this is, I think, somewhat promising, we're seeing more traditional outlets embrace this kind of network idea too. It's sort of foundational to what the Post and Courier in South Carolina, for example, is doing, of centralizing back office stuff, centralizing the tech stack, but doing so that you're able to place reporters throughout the state and achieve some level of statewide coverage while minimizing the cost of doing so by kind of centralizing operations. And that's also a model that's kind of foundational to how public radio works as well. And I think we're seeing that pursued with quite a bit of success in some cases.
Kim, we're going to have to bring this home now. And I'm going to give you the closing question. What's the one takeaway you hope local publishers, civic leaders, philanthropists walk away with from this year's report? Is there still time to turn this tide?
I think the overall message is one of urgency. We are continuing to lose newspapers at an alarming rate. That trend has not slowed. There's also an urgency to create and to add more entrepreneurs and more digital sites and other platform delivery systems. But we are at a moment where we got to move fast. If we're going to stop this trend, if we're going to preserve local news and information in communities across the country, and to me, that's the overarching message. This is a historic period of transformation, and we've got to embrace it, and we've got to find a way forward.
Zach Metzger, Project Director and Lead Researcher of the State of Local News Report, PhD candidate at Medill. And Tim Franklin, Senior Associate Dean, and John M. Moots, Chair in Local News at Northwestern's Medill, as well as the leader behind the Local News Initiative. Guys, I have a feeling I'm going to have you back on the show in the next few weeks. Keep cranking out the numbers. Keep also interpreting them for us. And thank you again for joining us quickly. I know your time is valuable, and we really appreciate you being here.
Happy to be with you, Mike. Thank you for having us.